Hello and welcome to Unacademy. I welcome you all to this session. Good morning to all of you. Now we have to start our Hindu analysis, in which we'll be covering 7 to 8 important topics out of the Hindu newspaper, and the topics are quite diverse from GS paper 1 till GS paper 4, including areas out of the PIB. So we'll be talking about the healthcare sector. Then we'll talk about a very problematic development with regards to education. Then we will further talk about the wildfires. This is related to global warming. Then we have a very interesting paradox when it comes to fuel and energy. We also have a very interesting survey out of environment ecology. Then a certain development in Kerala with regards to mapping. And last but not the least, a topic related to history. So if you look at it, we have from GS paper 1 till GS paper 3 to 4, and we'll be discussing everything in the most comprehensive manner possible with certain understanding. Right? Now, before I begin, this is the last date of the 3-day free trial period. First, second, third, with a registered mobile number or with a mobile number, if you use the link which is given in the description box, you can get access to all the courses, be it the recordings, be it the live classes which are going to happen today, be it the MCQs, be it the test series, everything, even the PDFs are available to you right now for free if you are going to use the link given in the description box to get access, and you have to use the code IS English to get access. But remember, this is the third day, the last day of the 3-day free trial period, but still an option to avail. Understand if Unacademy can help you in your preparation. Is it something which you need in your preparation and can in turn lead you to crack this examination your first or second attempt? So please do use this opportunity. It is a free opportunity. There is no understanding where you are going to be caught through the number or anything. You can just use your number, register on the app, and then use everything for free today at least. Now, looking at the topic list, good morning to all of you. We'll talk about that, Bhuvan, maybe in the end. When we talk about the topic list, there are certain areas which are important for mains. There are certain areas which are important for prelims. And what you have to understand is how to use this information in the examination. And I'll keep on telling you what is the basic idea of how you are going to use the data or the arguments in the examination. Now, let's start with the first topic. Strong health systems for all with better public spending. There are two aspects being talked about here. First is health systems, and the second one is better public spending. And this is an article which basically points out to a problem. So there are three types of articles in the newspaper. One which gives you a solution, one which gives you a problem, and the best article which the Hindu newspaper can give you or the PIB can give you is basically the article which gives you the problem also, the solution also. It is a complete article. Now, this topic is based on per capita spending on health between two types of nations. One identified as LMICs, which are basically low and middle income countries, vis-a-vis the high income countries, and it talks about a paradox. A paradox wherein though the per capita means per person spending between the low and middle income countries and high income countries, the gap has reduced from 2% to 1.68%. Still, this gap is actually widening and there is a catch-up game being played. And therefore, what it is talking about is that we are not spending enough And if we are spending enough, we are actually not spending it in the right direction. And therefore, one major argument is public spending. Public spending means government spending into healthcare sector is reducing. Now, there are two reasons which have been pointed out. First is based on what is called as the Development Assistance of Health, DAH. The word which is used is DAH, Development Assistance to Health. This is basically external aid or any aid given by a country to another country or to a world body or to a multilateral institution for health. Now, it points out that during the pre-pandemic phase, there was an increase in development assistance to health. During the pandemic phase, it reached to its highest point. Thereafter, there has been a sharp decline in the assistance being given to health, specifically in the low-income countries. 67% reduction from the US, 39% from the UK, France 35%, and Germany 12%. Now, this is called Trump effect. This is called as Trump effect because what Trump has done, he has made sure that if there was any assistance being given to low-income countries through US aid, that has now been removed. Therefore, there has been a sharp decline, and OECD points out that by the next year or by the next 2 years, there can be a 60% reduction from the peak of 2022. And this is where what we see is that nations which need development assistance, they are now in a pickle because they're not getting aid, they're not getting money from the nations which they relied upon. So this is the first point, which is global retreat or decline when it comes to development assistance of health, specifically to low-income countries, that too in Africa. So for example, a country like India is developing middle income, but the African nations which actually need US aid, which need the European aid, are now not getting enough. At the same point of time, the second aspect which is talked about is that there is increasing debt. 102 trillion in 2024 was the global public debt, out of which 30% is in developing nations, and therefore rising public debt means the government will try to rationalize and do cost cutting. They will try to show fiscal responsibility, but therein lies debt impacts three very critical areas: education, health, water, sanitation, and social services. That is where health is now being deprioritized by the nations in order to manage the debt and record interest payments which are being paid by the different nations. Therefore, what is the core issue here? The core issue here is that health spending has started to drastically decline across nations, and two major reasons are being talked about. The first reason is debt, national and global debt. At the same point of time, the second issue is the DAF, which is DAH rather, which is assistance or aid given by developed countries, that is going down, and together that has led to a major problem when it comes to spending in the healthcare sector. This is where the problem is identified, that we have a debt issue and we have a crisis of what is called as assistance to low and middle income nations. So this should in turn solve our problem, meaning if we are able to not divert funds away from health, and the same point of time if there is assistance coming through, if both these problems are sorted, then national health spending or global health spending should be managed. Per capita health spending would then be managed. However, the article goes further to point out that even when developing nations like India is spending on healthcare, they are spending in the wrong way. So it identifies three issues in the spending itself. First, it says that there is underutilization. This is the first issue. When there is a national budget which allocates something for health, there is underutilization. Close to 2/3 of the allocated funds have only been used. And one of the most dangerous developments is that in the National Health Mission, just 26% of the money earmarked for communicable and non-communicable diseases has actually been used. So when money has been allocated, it is actually not being used in the right sense. So therefore, at the same point of time, money is going down, spending is going down, but utilization also is not correct. And if the funds are lying, the health budget starts to shrink because next you are going to ask for less money. This is the first issue, which is underutilization. Second is obviously, what are we spending on? What are we spending on? If we are actually utilizing, what we are actually doing is we are giving higher wages and salaries, but we are not creating assets. And the spending is actually in the curative care of secondary rather than preventive care of primary health care. So we are spending in super specialty hospitals, we are spending in secondary healthcare, not at the grassroots level where we can prevent these diseases. So at the same point of time, we now have a situation where we are spending wrong. At the same point of time, we are using less. And if that was not enough, obviously, this brings the issue of ethics. You can use this in GS paper 4 quite well, which is governance and operational effectiveness, which is if corruption is reduced or the quality of bureaucracy improves, countries see greater positive effect in public health spending and desirable health outcomes. The converse means that if there is corruption, obviously public health outcomes are going to be bad. At the same point of time, we need a better budget. At the same point of time, we need better utilization. At the same point of time, we have to stop the leakages. Therefore, this article now basically gives you the problem and the solution, and then therefore creates a complete answer for you in a way. So, health outcomes and health spending both have seen. Now this is a mind map which I'm making for you. The idea is very simple. I want to summarize everything for you in one slide so that you understand everything in the best way possible, and at the same point of time you have a template for yourself also, which is that how to use an article and create a mind map so that you can use it in the examination. Now, health outcome and spending, we are seeing a decline. Now, there are two aspects to this. First is declining inflow, which is basically national debt or global debt leads to healthcare to have reduced allocation. At the same point of time, when we talk about the development assistance which has been given, aid is falling, will be 60% decline by 2027-28. This means that there is, into low income countries, low income countries, there is reduced allocation further. So we now have reduced allocation on both sides. Overall, if somehow budget is actually allocated also, then we are facing three problems. One is under utilization. At the same point of time, we have expenditure in curative, not preventive. And last but not the least is obviously corruption. All of this is leading to us going into a certain crisis which is impending. So we always respond to, you can say, pandemics, epidemics. COVID was a shock. Now, COVID led to us to increase to a point where the assistance was also good and healthcare spending was also good. After COVID has gone through, now the allocation is going down and healthcare outcomes are becoming secondary in that regard. Therefore, when we talk about spending and outcome, we have a two-pronged issue. One is in allocation and the other one is spending itself. Now, how do you use this information in the examination? There are two ways in which you can actually use it. First is in an ethics question, wherein you can talk about how all of these things actually are based on governance and corruption. So governance, medical governance and overall governance in the healthcare sector matters. In the second instance, what we can see is that at the same point of time, we have a issue in our core healthcare spending. It's an economics issue also. It's a science and technology issue also. It's a societal issue also. Therefore, this topic intersects with GS paper 3 also, GS paper 4 also, GS paper 1 also. That we are not spending in the right way. If we are spending it, we are then not utilizing it properly. And at the same point of time, there's a global shift away from universal healthcare towards debt and the assistance being in a way connected to each other. So you have to use these three concepts together. Are we clear about this? I'll take up your questions now. Says that the need to spend 2.5%. Yes, perfect, Anushka. That is a very good point. Great. Okay. Anybody has any issue here? If no, we'll move to the next topic. Perfect. Okay. One mains question for you for practice before we move ahead. So based on this article, you can get a question like this. The healthcare sector is in a dual crisis of allocation and spending. Critically examine. You can write the answer to this and you have to use the discussion which we've had. You cannot answer this question without having an understanding of this topic itself. Okay. Moving from health, we lead to education. Now, when we talk about education sector, simple, straightforward, text and context article. Why are government schools shutting down? Now, there are two contradictory images which we have in our mind as of right now, wherein the government is talking about spending more into education. It is talking about at the state or at the central level, is talking about how Right to Education Act is going to be properly applied. Quality education is very important. Upskilling is very, very important. and the idea that India can only go ahead if we use the demographic dividend properly. Therein lies the idea that you have to obviously use the education sector in the right way, in the right sector, where machine learning, AI, and the whole work, you can say labor landscape is changing. We need a better skilled force. Therefore, we need inclusive, but also in a way, the right type of education which should be given. It has to be inclusive. Women, the vulnerable classes, girl child, everybody has to be a part of this, you can say, transformation, but also the curriculum has to also change at the same point of time. Now, at the same point of time, when we see this new narrative being created that we are going for a new education system, the NEP, at that point of time, we also see a disturbing news like this, which gives you a very big problem which we are facing, which is in the name of rationalization. Government schools are closing across states, and 3 states, MP, Jammu and Kashmir, and Uttar Pradesh, are facing the biggest burden or are the biggest issue in this whole cogwheel in that regard. So, the biggest problem which we face here is close to 94,000 government schools have closed in the past decade, on an average 25 a day, contributing to 2.26 crore less enrollment into government schools. And in the enrollment itself, the schools, 71% of all students in 2005 used to be in government schools. Now it has become 49.24% if we just fast forward a decade. Now this is a concerning development, and this data is valuable for the examination, because if you don't use this data properly, you will not be able to answer the question if they ask about critically exam. Now, in absolute terms itself, it is problematic that close to 1 lakh schools have closed. At the same point of time, there has been a marked decline from 71% to 49.24%. So now there are more students in private institutions. At the same point of time, there are less students who are going to neighborhood schools, and therefore private schools bring in their own problems. Can you tell me what are the standard issues when there is privatization of education, and what in turn it will lead to? When we talk about a more shift towards private, what are the issues which it automatically entails? And now there are more students in private sector than public sector, and 94,000 schools have reduced. What are the issues with privatization of education and with more emphasis on private? This is also a very big issue which we face today, because we see this across the whole of the, you can say, urban areas, and now in rural areas also, where there is education mafia and the idea of how much when it comes to spending. See, private schools are profit oriented. They are asking for very high fees, arbitrary, or you can say irrational increase in fees, pressure on parents. We have seen a cartel behavior. There is pure, you can say, mafia behavior. Private schools are less inclusive, and at the same point of time, they disadvantaged groups, they drop out either because of fees or either because of generic issues itself. Better environment, expensive, less inclusive, perfect. So when we talk about public automatically, because government run, they are more inclusive, they are more accessible, at this, rather we'll say they are more inclusive, but there is economic accessibility. At the same point of time, private sector schools can do anything and everything. They have their own boards, and the control of the state over private itself is very, very difficult. So if we are going towards a reduction in 94,000 less schools, it will then have a certain bearing on how it manifests itself within the society itself. This is a very important point you have to understand. Now, the reason why are these schools closing is very, very problematic. See, the government of India has created a certain budget for education. Now, because education is in the concurrent list, which means that both the state and the center can legislate upon it, and there is mostly these, you can say, schools are either state funded, dualistically funded, which is center state money both, or center. But what is happening is, at the level of the center, at the level of the state, both are arguing that these schools are closing because of rationalization. Rationalization would mean cost cutting basically, or it is geographical rationalization or economic rationalization. The idea is very simple. The national education policy said that rationalization without endangering the concept of neighborhood schools should be done. But the number of schools which have been closed, it is not based on demographic shift, rather it is purely based on how much money is being spent. Now here there is a very interesting concept. See, there is a neighborhood A, there is a neighborhood B, and there is a neighborhood C. There are three neighborhoods. Now what previously used to happen, or what the logic of the right to education was, that each of these neighborhoods should have one school. These neighborhoods could be demographically different. They could have different, you can say, vulnerable groups also. This could be an area dominated by STs. This could be dominated by SCs. This could be dominated by OBC. There could be more girl population here, which is quite unlikely though. Then thereafter, there could be a minority population here. The idea was neighborhood schools should be there. Now the problem now which was emerging was these three areas were within, for example, 2 kilometers or 5 kilometers of each other, meaning each of these schools are within 5 kilometers of each other. Now what the government of India is doing, or the state governments are doing, is they are arguing that because they are all within a certain circle, we just need one school. So we'll eliminate this school, and let this school infrastructure be bigger or be the same. The idea is we will allow for these students to enroll in this neighborhood. Now this is basically rationalization. This is called geographical rationalization. There could be economic logic to it also, but the idea was that we need not decentralization, but a little bit of centralization, where if for example 500 students were here, 200 students were here, and 800 students were here, the idea was that this school is running just on the for 200 students. This is only running for 500 students. So therefore we can do one more thing. We can split these 100 students. 100 can come here, 100 can come there. This is basically rationalization. Now this rationalization is problematic because what it does is it exposes the social discriminatory practices to the children, and at the same point of time that percolates into the system itself, because it could be that these 200 children were in a tribal school, the teachers were teaching them in a certain way, they were feeling safe in this space. Now when they go to a school which has 800 students or 500 students, they may be exposed to new dynamisms and concepts, and therefore this rationalization process is dangerous and goes against the principle of right to education, but more than that, quality education. See, this will expose issues over a period of time, but the idea is, in the name of rationalization, you don't close schools. Please understand this point. This is a very, very severe point, a very dumb point also. Governments do cost cutting. You cut the cost of the government vehicles. You don't give bhattas to higher officers. There are ways to stop spending, but it is not to close schools itself. State government and the central government is closing schools in the name of rationalization and cost cutting. If it was a private sector school, we understand. That is how the private logic is there. Rationalization in education and in health cannot be by closing hospitals and schools. Now, the biggest issue is that 3 states are the most affected here also, and there is a severe impact. For example, Uttar Pradesh, sharpest decline, 25,000 schools have been reduced, reduction in government school infrastructure, contributing in less spending, and accessibility of students is less. Now, all of this will automatically manifest itself in what is called as gross enrollment ratio, which we can see in Madhya Pradesh. In Madhya Pradesh, 7.37 lakh students have no record of school itself. 11 lakh students are now in the category of what is called as drop box. Drop box means at the risk of being dropped out of school. 1.23 lakhs have already dropped out. 1.55 lakh students are left due to migration or displacement. There is 29,000 students in 2 districts itself which are in the drop box category. 3,500 government schools have 0 new admissions. 6,500 schools have fewer than 10 admissions, and government schools have declined. 22,600 schools have declined. Obviously, we are trying to figure out, but even a flagship scheme was not able to do anything. Now, this data, you don't have to learn. Obviously, for the examination, you don't have to learn the data. But you have to understand one thing. This is a trend. This is a big problem. In Jammu and Kashmir, 4,300 plus schools have closed or merged under rationalization. 4,382 schools have closed. Nearly 13,000 vacant teaching positions. Students have to now travel 4 to 6 kilometers to go to a functioning school itself. This is a problem. Universal, you can say, right to education is something which is guaranteed through the fundamental rights also. But the idea is one thing, which is that the government is not saying that we are removing accessibility. They are saying that for us, quality does not matter. And at the same point of time, the distance does not matter. But if a child has to go 4 to 6 kilometers on a daily basis, they will drop out of school. So therefore, we have seen an impact, and this impact is also varied. Muslim, scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, and the girl child. These 4 categories have shown on the ground effect of how there is going to be less enrollment and there is more dropout in these sectors. So therefore, what we are seeing is that this, in the name of rationalization, we can't produce a nation where right to education is guaranteed. The buck, they are just passing on the buck, which is that Lok Sabha concerned minister said that concurrently states are doing it. But the center equal responsibilities there. The idea is when the center is saying that we want to intervene, they are doing politics of NEP. Language politics is happening. And all of this is in turn leading to a place where we are not going anywhere. So 94,000 schools, lower allocation and varied impact is not a good trend for our education system. So what is the overall logic here? See, there is right to education. There is the issue of the concurrent list. And both center and state share responsibility over this. but both are using the same concept, which is that all of this is fine, but we have to rationalize. Now, the rationalization can be in the name of geographical rationalization or could be economic rationalization. But the point is that there is in turn 94,000 less schools, UP, MP and Jammu and Kashmir UT is basically reeling under the most. And overall, girls, Muslim population, SC, ST, these four categories are seeing an issue of accessibility to education, and this overall questions the quality of education which is being given and will also be reflected in the drop box numbers and the gross enrollment ratio. There are now more students in the private sector than in the public sector. Now, I leave it to you to understand and decide if this is what we want for New India. You are the future of this nation. You are the next set of IAS officers. And even if our permanent executives, which would be you, want to change something like this, when in the era of freebies, where states and even the center is ready to give anything and everything for free, does the word rationalization actually make any sense in the education sector? And should it actually be applied in the education sector? You have to understand this point. See, we have debt. We have to comply by the FRBM Act. We have to be fiscally responsible. But is cost cutting in education and health, basically these two topics bring in two major issues into context. Health and education are uncompromising aspects and related to the sustainable development goals also, related to our fundamental rights also, related to our basic well-being and living standard. If both take a hit because of public debt, assistance and rationalization, then what is the point of the state when they cannot manage where funds should be cut? And these are the same groups which need upliftment. How are we going to become a 5 trillion economy? How are we going to become a global superpower? How are we going to respond to the overall change in labor market? How are we going to become the harbingers of the next, you can say, what we call as the next industrial revolution, if our students are not educated only? So, do understand this point very clearly, that this is not a good development. And this article is not giving the solution, it is pointing to a problem. Now, together, before we go to the next topic, together we now have two articles which are interacting with each other. This is how you create a more unified understanding. See, there is global and national debt. There is decreased aid. You may call it the Trump effect if you want to call it. At the same point of time, there is lower allocation, underutilization, corruption, rationalization, and both are now, all these factors are now impacting the two most important sectors, which is health and education. In healthcare, what we are seeing is per capita spending is going down. In education, we are seeing public institutions closing. Overall, this is global headwind, this is global. These are internal. So I hope now you realize and understand that health education are not that different when it comes to budgetary allocation and how government, you can say, decisions impact them. Are we clear about these two topics? Two big topics, two important topics, two major sectors which are very relevant for mains examination. That is true. That is true, Mahe. That is totally true. You cannot compromise on human resource and human resource development. Both are very important for human resource development and even for HDA. Clear? Great. Okay. Now we'll shift our focus away from these two major sectors to what is happening in Europe. Now, you must have seen this in the news. It has been there for a very long time now, that Europe is reeling under a, you can say, wildfire crisis. Now, the numbers are this time astonishing and quite interesting because they are higher than what we've seen in the past 2 to 3 decades in Europe. So, with a very 1 month of summer still left in Europe and heat wave conditions already there, as of last week, 91,209 hectares of land has been destroyed in France and Spain by wildfires, and this 91,000 hectares is only in France itself. This is higher since 1980, and the overall report is that this number is going to break the records this time. Obviously, don't have to learn the numbers. That is obvious. But see, chart 1, this is data point. If you know what is data point in the Hindu newspaper, data point plays with graphs and gives us data. Don't obviously have to learn it because it is of no use for you in the examination. But what is important for you is generally that when we talk about the wildfire incidents, there is an increase which we have never seen previously. This is where the aspect of global warming comes through. 2026 alone has surpassed all previous decades, and the EU, the number of wildfires is the highest. Most affected is France and Spain, and the number of people displaced because of wildfires also, the number is very high this time, 2,24,000 people as of right now. We are still counting affected by wildfires. Now, for us as a UPSC aspirant, we have to understand why is this happening. You don't have to learn the data per se. You have to understand why. Why is that there is a wildfire crisis in Europe? This is linked to the environment plus geography plus global warming. So what has happened is there was above average rainfall in the winters, which in turn led to higher vegetation, but that was followed by record high temperatures, less soil moisture and increased water stress, which in turn led to more shrubs and pine trees. This in turn led to more wildfires because shrubs and pine trees and pine cones are very, very susceptible to fires. And therefore, the same continent which used to basically say that global warming is a global south issue is now going to see the real wrath of global warming. It is already reeling under that. So what is happening is that previously Europe had an average temperature of 1.08 degrees Celsius below the global average. Now it is at 0.87. So therefore, there's an increase in the mean temperature in Europe, and this is purely because of the way Europe is placed and its geography, and at the same point of time, the way global warming is impacting this whole sector. So therefore, what you have to understand is this whole process. Why are there more wildfires this time? So we have above average rainfall, then higher temperatures, severe water crisis, more combustible flora, then unprecedented spread this time, which we are seeing in France specifically. So this process is very, very important for you to understand because this is also true for other areas. true for other wildfire incidents. So they obviously will not ask you how many hectares has been destroyed in France or in Spain, but what they can ask you is what are the factors which leads to more wildfires? Why in the same zones where the tree species has not changed, the biodiversity has not changed, then what has changed? What has changed is very high rainfall, very high temperature, which in turn leads to more combustible material, severe water crisis, together leads to wildfires. You have to understand this spread, you have to understand this concept itself, which is that when we talk about environment, geography and global warming, see, the European sector was something which used to not actually be fully committed to global warming, be it the Green Climate Fund, be it the COPs, be it Paris Climate Agreement. They were more concerned about what is called as ozone layer depletion and Montreal Protocol. This was a basic understanding where common but differentiated responsibilities was seen to be a burden on the European sector, on the West. But today, now they are reeling under the same concepts because of their apathy towards the global south, and now because of their severe heat crisis and their wildfires, they are seeing the same processes which have been happening in India or in Brazil or in Latin America or in parts of Australia or in parts of the global south, which they were immune to previously. But now they are seeing the real wrath of global warming. This should lead to a better response from Europe. But unfortunately, the biggest global stakeholder here is US, and the US has a clown sitting on their president's position who does not believe in global warming per se, because for him, extreme weather events are not linked to anything related to global warming. It is just part and parcel of how the environment works. So, though Europe may change its perspective, and it's not that Canada is not reeling under wildfire crises. There is a Canadian wildfire crisis also, and the US is also doing that, but there is a certain hoax culture there that it's a environmental hoax, and therefore the US per se is not responding the way it should have or would have and has been responding to global warming per se. So therefore, this article is basically to point out this process to you, which is very important for you to understand in the overall scheme of things. Now, are we clear about this? Anybody has any issue in understanding how at the same point of time high rainfall and high, you can say, temperatures can together in turn lead to this crisis itself? I want everybody's consent here. Yes, sir, we understand what you're trying to say. Let's move on to the next article. 3 big articles from the editorial section are now done, which were relevant for the paper itself. Yes, sir? Okay. Now, the Ministry of Petroleum and the data which has been given by the ministry has given a very interesting paradox. Again, this is a paradox, purely full paradox. See, in Indian market, what we used to see was before the monsoons used to hit, petrol and the diesel, the consumption used to peak. During monsoons, this used to go down, and LPG consumption used to be constant or used to progressively increase. Now, what has happened here is the exact opposite. What we are seeing is that there is a 9.4% increase in diesel consumption and petrol 8.7% and LPG 17.4% reduction. Now, this is quite obvious because this is an after effect of the global supply chain shock and what the government of India was doing to manage the West Asian crisis. This will take time to revive back. That is a quite obvious aspect. This will take time to revive. However, this is again directly linked to global warming and specifically to El Nino and what we are facing. See, there has been a surge in petroleum and diesel, you can say, consumption, and generally diesel consumption for transport agricultural equipment is seen as a key indicator of economic development, but this is not for economic development. What has happened is because there has been a failure of the monsoon in certain sectors, more number of diesel powered pumps are being used to irrigate the fields in the Kharif season. Therefore, LPG consumption kept aside, diesel consumption is not high because there is more development activities. It is higher because of the reasons of the failure of the monsoons in certain sectors and more reliance on the irrigation than on monsoons. Previously, when the monsoons used to hit, the need for electric based or rather diesel based irrigation was less. Therefore, during this period, what we used to see a totally reversed logic. However, because of the failure of the monsoon in certain sectors, irrigation is being more relied upon. Therefore, diesel consumption is higher. Now, why am I discussing this topic with you? The reason for that is I want to show you how economics, geography, environment interact with each other. Meaning, a data from the economic sector can sometimes be indicative of what the nation is facing vis-a-vis as an environmental or geographical factor. Here, environment has a direct impact on how this data is actually developing at this point of time. This mismatch is in a way delayed monsoon plus global supply chain. LPG will obviously revive itself. This is not a very big issue. But diesel petrol is something which is basically indicating that we are still in that zone where the erratic nature of the monsoons can in turn lead to higher diesel production and petrol production, which is still not good for India. The reason for that is because we are a petroleum and in a way petrochemical, you can say, importing nation, specifically crude oil. We are exporting petrochemical byproducts, but the idea is because we are importing more and more petrol, the more diesel production means we have to import more. And in petroleum, we still have the controversial E20. In diesel, we don't have the concept of mixing. So therefore, this is a major issue. This is a major issue. And this is where the monsoons are now having an impact on our energy security also. So we have now discussed a small, short recap. We have discussed the education crisis with regards to closure of public schools. We have discussed the concept of how healthcare sector is seeing an issue because of less allocation, underutilization and issues. We've also understood how diesel and petroleum and LPG production or consumption is actually showing the concept itself, which is LPG is showing the impact of global supply chain. Diesel and petroleum is showing vis-a-vis the concept of the monsoons and the delays and the failure of the monsoons in certain sectors. So the last thing which we discussed was the European wildfires and how there is a link between the processes of a very, very wet winter, very hot summer, plus more combustible, you can say, material on the ground, which in turn leads to higher wildfires. This is the 4 things which we've discussed. Now, we obviously are a very, very diverse nation when it comes to biodiversity. And recently, the Zoological Survey of India has released a very interesting set of data when it comes to butterflies and moths population in India. So India is the home to 8.25% of world's butterflies and moths. This is very, very important. This is where this data can directly be used in the examination or prelims orientation. You should know this for sure. For prelims orientation, you need to know this, that 13,703 species, 8.25% of total moth and butterfly population. They have been cataloging this for the past 12 years. And why is this important? Because moths and butterflies are very, very important for maintaining ecological equilibrium. So therefore, these 13,703 species, 1,400 species of butterflies, 12,000 of moths, out of which 2,200 are actually nocturnal, which is that they are only active in the night. They all are very important to have a food equilibrium or an environmental equilibrium. This shows that the Indian subcontinent and India per se is still having ecological diversity ecological equilibrium, food chain equilibrium, and therefore overall equilibrium when it comes to the nocturnal plus what is called as daytime pollinators. This data, obviously this data per se is not important, but this is important, which is this equilibrium aspect. They have previously asked this question in statement based questions in the examination directly. They can also ask you at the same point of time, what is the position of India when it comes to total species of butterflies and moths. This word which you see is the study of butterflies and moths. So again, short article, simple straightforward article, but important for the examination because it gives you a lot of important data. So moving ahead from moths and butterflies, we go to Kerala, where the Kerala government and the state forest department has now pointed out to a very big issue which is emerging recently. See, Kerala is obviously very important when it comes to the biodiversity of India. Western Ghats, the Silent Valley, and a lot of trekking, illegal trekking routes have now been, you can say, tagged to the online Google Maps or even Apple Maps. And this is in turn leading to a unprecedented crisis where unauthorized people, tourists, are entering into very sensitive ecological zones and disturbing the ecological diversity there. Very interesting concept. See, that people have illegally geotagged individuals, census volunteers have uploaded sensitive protected forest locations, example Silent Valley, into online navigation platforms, which in turn is leading to unlawful entry of tourists in the name of trekking into this sector, which in turn has now led to a reaction from the Kerala Forest Department, which is now removing illegally geotagged locations within the forest, reserve forests which are not basically accessible to everyone. You cannot enter into these forests randomly as a picnic spot or as a trekking spot, but because of the locations being provided by the census officials or sensitive locations given out by wildlife census programs, the Kerala Forest Department is now even rescuing people from the forest. They are so confused that how did this person actually reach there? And that is because the data was available online or on Google Maps, and therefore people were trekking through the very sensitive and reserve forest in this sector. Therefore, a problematic development which Kerala is trying to manage. Now, all these articles are short articles, but interesting because this tells you about how this moth diversity, the butterfly diversity, is very important for the overall equilibrium. But this tells you how we as humans are misusing the technology to enter into ecologically sensitive zones, which we shouldn't. And therefore, the geotagging of online maps and illegal routes within the Silent Valley and this sector is problematic generally. Then we move on to the last article, which is from the PIB. On the PIB page, 3rd August, as of making the PPT, there was nothing available. 2nd August, what we had was the Prime Minister congratulating all the people, all the athletes who have received either the gold or silver medal. Very, you can say, one of the best hauls of what we call as Commonwealth Game medals. We are now the next host. That has also been captured in different newspapers. But there was a very important, you can say, tribute paid by the Prime Minister to Pingali Venkayya on his 150th birth anniversary. Now, very, very, very important for 2026-27 prelims. Very, very important. 150th, so generally very important. Now, I want to give you more information about him so that you can understand why is he important and finer details about him. So when we talk about Pingali Venkayya, who is considered to be is the designer of our national flag, he has a very interesting history. Born in 1876 in the Machilipatnam sector. He, from a very young age, started to show interest for learning and education. He will even go to Colombo, where he will pursue geology and knew Japanese, Urdu, Sanskrit language, which shows his love for language itself. Further, he was known as the Patti Venkayya, which is cotton Venkayya, because he did a lot of research on cotton cultivation, which is quite interesting. We don't know about that. And further, he also participated in the British Boer Wars. Boer Wars is basically British versus the Dutch in the South African sector. There was a spillover into certain parts of Asia also, but he was also serving in the Indian army in the British Boer Wars, which showed him the political situation and the impact will in turn lead to him become nationalistic. He was also called Japan Venkayya because he gave a speech in Japanese in the Baptala in 1913. This part of his life is actually not known quite a lot. This is the, you can say, obscure part. Where we know him from is when he published in 1916 for the first time 30 designs for the Indian national flag inspired by other nations. That is where in 1921 the first flag which he will show to Mahatma Gandhi will actually be the Swaraj flag, having two colors, red and green, representing Hindus and Muslims. And the flag also had the charkha, which represented the Swaraj. So it was a very simple, straightforward flag, two colors along with the charkha inside it. But that is where Mahatma Gandhi advised Venkayya to add white to represent peace. And it is in the INC session of 1931 where the flag committee then replaced this with the saffron and green and white flag with the charkha, basically the way you do hand spinning that. And later President Rajendra Prasad post independence changed the charkha to the Ashok Chakra. So what you need to know basically is this timeline. I have just put it on this slide itself. This whole timeline from the initial drafts of 30 potential flags to the Swaraj flag, to adding white, then saffron for courage, white for peace, and green for faith, along with the charkha, which later becomes along with the Ashok Chakra being added by the Rajendra Prasad committee. This is important information for you, very, very important information for you, because 150th anniversary, generally you would need to have an understanding overall. So please, you should know his early life. At the same point of time, you should know the major developments. I put it on this slide. When you get access to this PPT, please do go through this section, because art and culture current affairs as it is comes less, but whenever it comes, it is very relevant for the examination. So when we started our analysis for today, we set out to understand all of these topics. I hope that now you have an understanding of the, you can say, all the 7 to 8 topics we had to set out. First topic is a short summary for you so that you can understand everything in the best way possible. The first obviously was about public spending decreasing in healthcare, and when it is decreasing in healthcare, there's a cascading effect. The most important aspect here is spending is in the wrong direction and less allocation also. Then we discussed how in the name of rationalization, 94,000 schools were closed across all states of India, but 3 most affected, Jammu and Kashmir, MP and UP. Then we talked about how there are so many wildfires data, but the reason why that is happening. Then how fuel consumption is showing a paradox. In the same monsoon season, when we see a dip in diesel, there is an increase. At the same point of time, we have 8.25% of all the butterflies and moths in the world in India. Illegally geo-tagged maps are now going to be removed. And very important, Pingali Venkayya's 150th anniversary, therefore important for the larger scheme of things. So I will see you tomorrow again for the CNA at 10 o'clock itself. Thank you. Take care. And this PPT will be available in our, you can say, Unacademy IAS English Telegram channel. You'll find it there. And I also upload it to my Telegram channel within the next 2 to 3 hours. Thank you. Take care.